Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, once called deliberately non-compliant, my guest is all about the importance of language when it comes to diabetes.
It's not about political correctness gone mad. The reason that I think that diabetes has such an image problem, and that image problem extends to things like really lousy reporting sometimes in the media, to people not wanting to put their hand in their pocket to donate to diabetes, to people not understanding how serious it is because of the way we talk about it. There is so much finger pointing and blame and shame because of the language that we've used.
We'll talk more about Renza Scibilia's non-compliance. It has to do with her looping using one of those do-it-yourself options, and about her diagnosis as a young adult. In our community connection this week, the Renegade Run making noise in the Northeast for the 7th year in a row, and a closer look at keeping insulin at the right temperature from the pharmacy to the fridge. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to the show. I am so glad to have you along. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes. My son was diagnosed just before he turned 2. That was back in 2006. So that means we are coming up on 12 years of type 1 diabetes. My husband has type 2. I have a background in broadcasting, local radio and television news, and that is how you get the podcast. And speaking of local TV and radio news, Syracuse was great. I told you that I was heading up to my alma mater of Syracuse University to not only talk to students about podcasting. They had their first podcasting panel at this school, very well known for broadcasting. And I was also able to meet with some wonderful JDRF families and a Syracuse University football player who lives with type 1. I posted about both of those events in the Facebook group, and we'll have an episode all about that with the interviews from that event coming up in just a couple of weeks. Benny's trip to Washington, DC went really well. I also posted about that in the Facebook group as I'm sort of playing catch up here on the podcast. So sometimes the show shifts out of real time, as can happen with a podcast. But if you want to keep up with everything, please go ahead and join the Facebook group. We also have a really big announcement coming up, and the Facebook group will be one of the first places where you can learn about it. I'm so excited and a little bit nervous, and I will share more about that as soon as I can. It should be right in November, Diabetes Awareness Month. In November, the very first day of November, I'll be out at the DiabetesMine Summit out in California. We're going to be doing some podcasting from there as well. They've got a setup for me, which is amazing and wonderful. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll keep you posted on what happens out there. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The One Touch VarioFlex meter seamlessly syncs with the free One Touch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the One Touch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, One Touch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the One Touch VarioFlex meter and One Touch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. My guest this week is joining me all the way from Australia, from Melbourne. It is amazing to me. We have such a great international audience. People really do listen from all over the world. And I find myself trying to keep up on the technology and the device makers that are releasing things in different countries. And I apologize that, it's very much focused on the U.S. and I do get email and feedback from Europe and from Australia. And it is wonderful. Please keep it up. I will do my best, even though my knowledge is sometimes limited. So getting feedback from people from as far away as Australia is amazing. And I actually got to meet Renza Scibilia, our guest this week, a few years back. Man, she travels a lot. I did not ask her how many frequent flyer miles she has, but she has got to be one of those gold cards. Renza was diagnosed with type 1 in 1998, so she is marking 20 years now. She's a longtime blogger and a voice in the diabetes online community. Officially, she works for Diabetes Australia, the third oldest diabetes association in the world. And I've wanted to talk to Renza for a while now. You know, she's been doing this really interesting look at language and diabetes, the words we use. And she was recently referred to, I love this, as deliberately non-compliant. We will find out exactly what happened there and why she has embraced it. Here's my interview with Renza Scibilia. Renza, thanks for making the time to talk to me. I know that the timing is always difficult when we try to do an international call. I really appreciate you going with the flow here. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be here. And actually, this time is good for me. So, you know, often I'm doing these sorts of things at 2 a.m., but it's nice and early, but not too early. And I've had a coffee, so I might even sound cohesive. So that's great.
That's funny. I love it. Yeah, I'm definitely not drinking coffee. I'm going to start winding down at this time of day here. It's evening in North Carolina. That's funny. So we have so much to talk about. You travel the world, it seems, talking about diabetes, but let's focus in first on you. Can you tell me your story? I know you've had type 1 for many years. You were diagnosed in 1998. How did you find out you had type 1?
Yeah, so I did celebrate my 20th anniversary this year. And, you know, my story was, and when I think about it now, I say thankfully boring. It was very much, so from, I guess, the first symptom that I realized to diagnosis was 10 days. And it was, you know, textbook. I was really thirsty. I was peeing all the time. I lost quite a bit of weight. My vision started going blurry. I was exhausted. I went to my GP and I said, these are my symptoms. Could I have diabetes? And honestly, to this day, I have no idea how I even knew what the symptoms of diabetes would be because there's no one in my family with diabetes. And her response was, you're being a hypochondriac, but look, we'll send you off for a blood test and we'll see. And then the blood test came back and sure enough, her words to me, and I won't say it because it is an expletive, but her words to me were, expletive, you have type 1 diabetes. And so that was how I found out. And I was 24 at the time, and yeah, that was 20 years ago.
So she didn't miss a beat in terms of your age, and a lot of times we talk to young adults who are diagnosed, and because they're in their 20s, the general practitioner thinks I couldn't possibly be type 1, but she got it right away.
She did, and that's why, you know, that's why I say thankfully boring. You know, I know those stories of people who, and it's not just adults, it's kids too who go to the doctor time and time again and they're sent away and it's a virus, it's this, it's that, here are some antibiotics, and people will wind up in DKA in emergency or, you know, or even worse. And so my really boring story, you know, the day I was diagnosed in the morning, she picked up the phone straight away and called an endocrinologist, a private endo, and I was there by that afternoon seeing an endocrinologist for the first time, and he gave me the option of, you can either stay, I can give you your first insulin injection now and you can come back tomorrow morning and we'll talk all about this, or the alternative is you can be admitted into hospital for 5 days. And I said, I don't want that. So he, you know, gave me an insulin shot and sent me home. And then I was back first thing the next morning and I learnt to inject. It was, you know, that first injection was the only one that somebody else has given me. And I spent, you know, the next day with him and with a diabetes educator and a dietitian and sort of was doing that as an outpatient every second day for a week. You know, when I think about it now, there was no, I mean, it's traumatic being diagnosed with a chronic health condition, obviously, but there was no trauma in terms of, you know, being rushed to emergency and not knowing what was going on and having had this, you know, going on for ages. I feel that it was thankfully boring, and I'm happy to own that.
Hey, that sounds good to me. If you have to have it, boring is good when it comes to healthcare. How did you get into advocacy and to making diabetes so much a part of what you do, not just what you live with yourself?
Well, I completely and utterly fell into it. So I'm a classically trained flute player. So obviously, you know, I studied for a career in diabetes advocacy. And I actually, I was doing some volunteer work for a diabetes organization. I actually had quit my job. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was really just, I'd been a teacher and then I had, you know, sort of done a couple of other things, and then I'd stopped working. My husband and I traveled a bit overseas, and I was doing some volunteer work for Diabetes Victoria, which is a state-based diabetes organisation in Victoria. And I went in one day to do something and they said, oh, would you like a job? We've got a 3-day-a-week basically it was, we don't do anything for people with type 1. Would you like to be that person who does that? And so it was a 3-day-a-week position that sort of, that's how it started. And that was 17 years ago now. So I've been doing this now for quite a bit of time.
Okay, now we're going to talk a lot about diabetes, but let's go back and talk about your musical education. And career. Wow. So you're classically trained. Did you go to school? Is this something you've done since you were a little girl? Do you still play?
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't still play. So I started playing the flute when I was 8 because, it was just one of those things when you were in grade 3 and you were a girl, you played flute. That's what all the girls did at my primary school. And I had a primary school with this amazing music program. And so it was just, I was really, really lucky, and I started then and played right through secondary school or high school, and then I studied music at the Conservatorium at Melbourne University, and then I became a teacher, and but I don't play anymore. I now live vicariously through my husband, who's a jazz musician, so there is a lot of music in my life still, but not in any way made by me.
Is it flautist or flutist, or is it different flautist in Australia?
Well, we say flautist, but I think it might, I don't know, maybe it is flat. This is one of the issues, is that the way that we say and pronounce things in Australia is quite different, and I have been constantly, ridiculed when I'm traveling in the US for the weird ways that we say things. We say flautist. I don't know. You guys might say flautist. I don't know.
I'm going to say that you play the flute.
You play the flute. That works too. That's good. Yeah. I did play the flute.
Does your daughter play? I mean, in a house with 2 musicians, one of whom is not currently practicing. Yes. Does she have an interest?
She plays the cello. And does she have an interest? Look, it's at times it is done under duress. I think there's a little bit of teenage pushback of, a house that really is very full of music. You cannot walk through a single room where there is not evidence of music in this house. But she plays cello. She's in the orchestra at school, and she's actually quite good. But she, her future is not as a musician.
Oh, that's just so interesting. When I think about you and diabetes these days, I think so much about your campaign, although I know it's not a formal campaign, or maybe it is, your campaign to get people to think about the language that we use. Talking about words like non-compliant and other negative words that are used by clinicians and healthcare providers. When my son was diagnosed almost 12 years ago now, I didn't think about those things at all. And we would say all the time, we want to teach him how to make sure that he does what he needs to do to take care of himself, and that he's always compliant and that sort of thing. And it's really changed how I think about it. Was there a time when all of that flipped around for you as well? I don't imagine you were diagnosed and immediately went into correcting healthcare providers on how to talk.
No, you're right. But, words have always mattered to me. So I've always written in some capacity, I guess. So I've always understood the power of words. But you're right. I certainly, the day that I was diagnosed, I'm pretty sure that had a doctor used the word non-compliant to me, I wouldn't have jumped down their throat, which I tend to do a little bit these days when people do that. Look, I don't know that there was, a flashlight moment where I suddenly went, right, this is something that's suddenly making sense. But I do know that, as I sort of started participating in, peer support activities and talking with other people with diabetes, I could understand and see that this whole issue around language and words and the way that we were spoken to and spoken about and the messaging around diabetes was problematic for a number of reasons and a number of people. And so, it's always been something that we have spoken about. And then when I started working for a diabetes organisation, we always had really set guidelines. We would never use the word diabetic, for example, in any of our publications. That was, 17 years ago, that was the way it was. It was also really interesting that one of the programs that I managed while I was at Diabetes Victoria this fell within my program, was our diabetes camps program for children with diabetes. And we would never say your blood sugar is good or bad. It was always your blood sugar's high, your blood sugar's low. It was all about, let's just call this what it is. It's a bit of information and how we deal with it. Now it's high, that means we need to do X. It's a bit low, that means we need to do Y. And I could see that this was already happening in, I guess, quite an informal way. But then as an organisation, we decided that it needed to be more than that.
Right back to Renza in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And we're really lucky to have a great relationship with our endocrinologist. I know I can call anytime, or, I can even email. I can get help on answers. And it's been that way since Benny was 2. When he was diagnosed, we have the same endo. It's amazing. But using the Dexcom really makes all of that even easier. We used to keep logs. I remember the yellow legal pad that I know I have somewhere. Man, but with the Dexcom G6 now, you get a reading every 5 minutes. It makes it easy to spot trends and get a dynamic picture of your blood glucose levels. Being able to send our information through Dexcom Clarity makes appointments a lot more productive. Our doctor has more information related to Benny's glucose levels. Managing diabetes is not easy, but I do feel like we have one of the very best CGM systems working for us. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Renza talking about how important words really are.
This was really led by, the CEO of Diabetes Australia is Professor Greg Johnson, and this has always been something that he's been really, quite adamant about, is using words that people feel encouraged by rather than discouraged by. And he wanted us to have a position statement that we could hold up and use as an example for people to say, these are the words that help rather than hinder. We're really lucky in Australia to have the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, and the foundation director is an absolutely incredible woman named Professor Jane Spate. So Jane was doing some research around this. So what we put together was this position statement that had all the evidence about why language matters, but then also this really neat little table that was, instead of using this word, use this word and this is why. So it was actually, instead of just saying, don't do this, we were trying to explain to people why and also giving them alternatives. And I guess it's grown from there. And that was 7 years ago now. So we've been talking about it formally, I guess, for 7 years as a diabetes organisation. And it's probably, it is certainly one of the most, valuable things I feel that I've been involved in. I'm incredibly proud about it. And I'm always thrilled, to see that this is something now that it has legs and wings, and it's, it's everywhere now. It is certainly something that obviously, quite clearly, I could speak about for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I'm curious, as an American, Diabetes Australia seems to be a group that does many things, not just what we think of here in the States with like the American Diabetes Association or even JDRF. And when you brought up the behavior aspect, was that a study? Is that something that's ongoing? Tell me a little bit more about that. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so the Behavioural Centre, so the ACBRD, the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, is a centre that is actually a collaboration between Diabetes Victoria and Deakin University in Melbourne. It's staffed by these incredible psychologists who are really looking at why we diabetes the way we diabetes, I guess, is one way to think about it. And, it's really moving forward from just measuring the success of something to do with diabetes on what our numbers are, what our HbA1c might be, or it's got to be about more than that. We know that it's about more than that. So a lot of the research that they're doing is around, trying to understand better the way that people behave and then, I guess, translate that into how outcomes can be better when it comes to diabetes. Absolutely thrilled that we have this centre in Australia. I'm thrilled that we have Jane Spate leading it. She is remarkable. It's something that's truly wonderful. It is something that, I really feel has changed the conversation when it comes to how we're talking about diabetes in Australia. Diabetes Australia is the national body, and that's where I work now. And, a lot of the work that the ACBRD does, and we work very closely with them, informs, a lot of the work that we do. And it's always wonderful when we're talking policy and advocacy to be able to have this evidence around how, certain things will make people feel better about their diabetes and outcomes will be better. Surely that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people to not feel judged, not feel stigmatized, not feel overwhelmed, not feel distressed about living with diabetes. And the centre is certainly looking at ways to make that the case for people with diabetes.
Let's talk a little bit about technology, because you're involved in something that we've mentioned quite a bit here on the podcast, which really is unfortunately something that only a very small percentage of people with diabetes get to use, and that is looping.
Yes.
When did you start looping, and how did you come to that?
So I had gosh, I love making up words sometimes. I had my loop-anniversary. I didn't make up that word, but I love made-up words, I should say. So I had my loop-anniversary about 3 weeks ago. So it's been 12 months. Oh. And I came to it. I was in New York, not this January gone, the one before, and I met up with somebody who showed me, and I was fascinated by it. And I thought, okay, well, is this something I could do? I knew I had one of these, these pumps that you could loop with, and I know that they're almost becoming rare as hen's teeth. They're just magic to have that. But it took me then a good 8 months before I was ready to do it. I read the documents. I ordered a Riley link. I was already using Dexcom, so that was fine. But I kept reading the documents, and I'm not especially techie, so I was reading. I can't do this. I've got no idea what this is about. These words don't make sense. But thankfully, the step-by-step loop instructions have been written by very smart people with people like me in mind. And there was that day where I went, no, I'm doing it this afternoon. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and I built it, and I had questions, and thankfully I had some people that I could reach out to ask some questions, and then that was it. And 12 months ago, and I haven't looked back. It honestly, for me, and I understand that, you're right. Unfortunately, there aren't all that many people who are able to do this, and equally it's not for everybody. But for me, this is the smartest thing that I have done in terms of my diabetes management. The smartest thing. I feel the least burdened by diabetes than I have in 20 years.
What's changed for you, especially for people who may hear the term looping and we think we understand, but what changed for you? What does it do for you? So
I think that the first thing that was really, really noticeable was how it affected my sleep. So I have always been a great sleeper. I was that teen who could sleep until midday and then, really didn't want to get out of bed and sleep for hours. I get on it. I think that I do so much flying. I'm rarely awake when the plane takes off. I've already fallen asleep by the time it's taxiing. That I'm a great sleeper. And yet with diabetes doesn't want you to sleep. So, even if I hadn't had a night where I was awake because I was low or awake because I was high, I'd wake up some mornings feeling absolutely exhausted. And it wasn't until I looked at my Dexcom app and could see, oh, right, I was low for 3 hours and both Aaron, my husband, and I had slept through the alarms, or I was high for 3 hours and no wonder I feel like I've been hit by a bus. That's why, I would wake up feeling exhausted. But when I started looping, I would wake up and I say, I tell people that I felt like I could move mountains. And after a couple of weeks, one morning I was up and probably dancing around the kitchen or something, and my kid said to me, what is wrong with you? How much coffee have you had? Why are you so happy in the mornings these days? And I said, because I am sleeping like I haven't slept for 20 years. This is what I'm like. And I have been like that for the last 12 months now. So sleep was definitely the first thing. But also it's just the automation of the system means that I have to do less diabetes and I have to think about diabetes less. And so it's freed up a lot of my brain space. I speak at the Data Exchange meeting at ADA in June and said that since they've been using, I think they were using OpenAPS, but since they've been using that, they feel that they've got an hour back of their life each day. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. And when you think about that 7 hours a week, I mean, that's adding up to significant time where we're suddenly freed to live life and not just be living diabetes anymore.
It's amazing to hear that. We've just been using the Basal IQ from Tandem, which has the low suspend, and that has, I think, really changed a lot for my son just in the few weeks we've been using it in terms of he has fewer interruptions now. Yeah. I don't know that he's thinking about it that way, but I sure am. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. And so the T-Slim has just been launched into Australia.
Right.
Fortunately not with Basal IQ yet because we haven't got the G6 yet. But apparently that's coming next year. And then, the next step Control IQ. And I mean, this is amazing. And that's probably the thing that's going to make me stop and think, okay, am I ready to move from something that is me being deliberately non-compliant to, to a regulated system? Because I think that, it looks absolutely fabulous.
Well, and let's talk about deliberately non-compliant. Yeah. So what was that about?
Oh, so
wait, we love it. Don't be sad.
So
Don't
be
upset.
I'm totally owning it now, which is hysterical because, if anybody had called me non-compliant previously. But so I spoke at a conference in Australia in October last year. It was a technology conference and I've been looping for just a couple of months at this stage, but I was meant to be talking about new diabetes technologies, and I was actually on the organising committee, and I said to the chair of the organising committee, look, can I be talking about DIY APS? Is this going to be okay? And she said, absolutely, of course we should be talking about it. So I spoke about it and explained what it was, because I have to say 95% of the people in the room had never heard of it before. So explained what it was and what, just those initial 2 months had been like for me, and how incredible it was, and that this was something that, whilst numbers were really small, it would be growing, and that the clinicians in the room could expect at some point to have somebody walk in and say, either I want to do this or I am going to do this. And I presented this very much in this is my experience, as I do all the time, my experience. I'm not endorsing it. I work for Diabetes Australia. We're not endorsing it. This is just me and my diabetes. And it's probably fair to say that the general consensus in the room was, oh my goodness, this is horrific and terrifying. And, to the point of people calling me irresponsible and saying I shouldn't be talking about this, saying that as an health organisation, somebody who works for Diabetes Australia, it's really dangerous for us to be associated with it in any way. And I walked out of that room slightly traumatised, and I do a lot of public speaking. So for me to suddenly walk out feeling like that was, I don't think I'd ever felt like that. And anyway, I was having a cup of coffee afterwards with a couple of people, and one of them was a psychologist called Tim Skinner. And Tim said to me, well, you know what the problem is, Renza, after I'd said how I was a little bit shocked at the response. And I said, no, what? And he looked at me and he said, well, you're a deliberately non-compliant diabetic. And my head spun around and I looked at him and he was very cheekily smiling. And Tim was involved in the writing of the Diabetes Australia language position statement. So, it was very tongue in cheek. And I said, well, what do you even mean by that? And he said, well, you've gone from just being non-compliant and not doing what your health professionals say and doing what you want to deliberately seeking out ways to, mess around with devices to make it do what you want to do. So, yeah, now you're deliberately non-compliant. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm totally owning that. And then I wrote a blog post about it the next week, thinking that, this is just a little funny anecdote. And it kind of took off a little bit. Yeah, so, I now have a phone case with that on there that somebody kindly made. And my mate David Burren, who blogs as the Bionic Wookie, has a shop where he sells T-shirts and phone cases and stickers with deliberately non-compliant, as well as other things on there. So now I'm wearing it as a badge of honor.
I thought it was brilliant because not only did you take that non-compliant that just now makes my skin crawl.
I know.
Because who wants to be labeled not, we're doing the best we can. Even people who don't have the education and access that we're so lucky to have, they don't want to suffer with diabetes. Nobody wants to be non-compliant. And here you are taking this awful word and then using it in the best way. You're non-compliant because you're doing more. You're doing more than your healthcare professionals. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that, I guess this is the power of words, and it is turning words that you're exactly right. That, I think it's Kerry Sparling who says, it's not me that's non-compliant, it's my pancreas. And, to use words like non-compliant that blame and shame people with diabetes because things aren't going the way that we would like them to is just, it's terrible. It really is terrible. It's absolutely demoralizing.
Well, it's helped me quite a bit. Adults with type 1 like yourself have really guided me. And I just want to say thank you because my 13-year-old, you want to talk about non-compliant. He's a great kid and he knows what he's supposed to do, but he forgets. And I'm not going to text him 400 times a day to tell him what to do. That would ruin our relationship.
Yeah.
And so I would never call him non-compliant. And I think that learning from you all has helped immeasurably to make our relationship good and to give me perspective. He was one of these kids, he was super kid with diabetes for so long, and then they get to this age and they're like, oh, I just want to be a teenager. So thank you. It's really helped me quite a bit.
I get it. I have a 13-year-old.
Yes.
And, it's not that they're being non-compliant. It's that they're being teenagers. There's so much going on. Their hormones are going absolutely nuts and there's so much going on in there. This is such an amazing time for them. I feel so privileged that I'm watching my daughter grow up at this point in time. But, yeah, she's an absolute nightmare at times. But it's being a teenager. It's being a teenager.
Exactly.
And, I thank you so much, though, for saying that. And I really love the fact that you're acknowledging that your son is a teenager first. He's a kid first who happens to have diabetes. And, that's all we as adults, I guess, are saying too. We're people with diabetes and we happen to have we're people and we happen to have diabetes.
So what is your advice for, and I'll leave it wide open for you to step in as you want, for either adults with type 1, for parents who are navigating this? We're talking about language. I don't feel like I have to walk on tiptoe and watch everything I say. But at the same time, I try to be mindful. I mean, that's parenting anyway. But any advice for parents or for people with type 1?
I think that the thing about the whole diabetes language matters movement is that living with diabetes or living around diabetes, we have to use language that we feel comfortable with. So I would never, ever say to a person with diabetes, don't use those words. Don't say that. I use the words when I'm talking about my body. I refer to it as broken sometimes because it genuinely feels like that. And somebody picked me up on that the other day and said, your body's not broken. And I said, well, actually, to me it is. It doesn't mean that I feel that it's any less necessarily, but that's just how in my mind I frame things to help me make sense. So I think for people with diabetes, using words that they feel comfortable with, that's what they should be using. They should never, ever be told that the words that they're using to describe their own diabetes are they're not the right words. I think we need to be really clear about that. The whole language thing is about, helping people who are talking to people with diabetes or talking about diabetes, talking about it in a way that generally encourages rather than discourages and demotivates. But I just would say to people to always be considerate and remember that words do matter and words have such power. And I think sometimes we forget that. And if we're living in a world where so much of that world is online and we are firing words off left, right and centre, sometimes and often it is unintentional, but we do say things that perhaps miss the mark a little bit. I know that I misfire all the time because I'm, live tweeting and in the heat of the moment, I, say something that perhaps the nuance is missed. But I would just urge people to remember just the power of words and also that it's not about political correctness gone mad. The reason that I think that diabetes has such an image problem, and that image problem extends to things like really lousy reporting sometimes in the media, to people not wanting to put their hand in their pocket to donate to diabetes, to people not understanding how serious it is because of the way we talk about it. There is so much finger pointing and blame and shame that because of the language that we've used, that those outside of the community think that this is something that they shouldn't be interested in or supportive of or wanting to know more about. The language has far, far-reaching consequences. It's not simply about making sure that you don't upset somebody with the word that you use to describe their own personal diabetes.
That's a great point because, you hear that political correctness, but it has so much more of an effect than just a dumb joke on Twitter.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we need to look at it, obviously constantly coming back to that personal perspective, but we need to also look at it at a community perspective and outside of our community perspective. How do we want people to be seeing and talking about diabetes? And I want people to know that this is a serious health condition. I want people to know that nobody asks to get any sort of diabetes. And if anybody develops any sort of diabetes complication, we didn't ask for that to happen either. That we are doing the very, very best we can, and we need to use words that really communicate that effectively.
On complications, as a parent, I think a lot of our time is spent thinking if I do this, I can prevent that. If I just do this right, this won't happen. And so much of the conversation about complications is preventing it. And my eyes have really been opened in the last couple of months, it's really just been the last couple of months, about how that conversation needs to continue if and when complications do develop. And you've been on the front end of that too. Can you talk a little bit about educating people about just talking frankly about diabetes complications?
So this is something that Chris Ruden, who is better known in the diabetes world as the Grumpy Pumper, really...
I never knew his real name. Oh, that's so funny.
I've just outed him.
We'll call him Happy Chris.
I haven't, because we've written some things together where his real name as well as his diabetes moniker have been used. So I haven't, I'm not revealing any secrets. But there's no point in calling him Chris. So Grumps developed a foot ulcer last year, and he's been writing and sharing his story. And the whole point of it, I guess, is that, trying to just tell a story and allow people to feel comfortable hearing about it, which is the first thing because we don't talk about it, hearing about and seeing what's going on, but then also being able to share their own stories about it. So what sort of happened, with the hashtag talk about complications, well, suddenly people were feeling comfortable about telling their own stories about living with complications. Because I think you're right. We talk about complications as an endpoint. It's do everything you can to stop getting complications. Well, hang on a minute. What happens then even when we do? Because it's not like our lives stop the minute that we develop a diabetes-related complication. Then we've got what happens afterwards. So suddenly people were saying, I have this complication, but I have never felt comfortable speaking about it. I have felt judged. I've felt blamed. I've felt ashamed to say anything. And people were suddenly feeling that actually within our community, it was a safe place to have this conversation. And you know what? Everybody needs support, and that includes people, probably especially people who have developed diabetes complications and are feeling like they're so isolated and so alone and that they don't have anyone that they can talk to about it. So this has been Grumps' sort of thing about getting people to talk about complications. And, of course, my thing is all about language, and I'm thinking this has got to be about reframing the way that, again, it comes back to reframing the way we talk, the words that we use. Prevention is a really tricky word because it sounds a bit like an absolute, but we know that we can do everything that we are told to do. We can follow guidelines to the letter, and yet we might still develop complications. Or we can completely ignore the guidelines and throw them out the window and do whatever we want and have, less than optimal diabetes management, and yet we don't get complications. There are no guarantees in diabetes, and I think that that's part of where this conversation goes is, of course, we should be doing whatever we feel is best for ourselves and feeling supported. But if it so happens that we do develop diabetes complications, we still need that support. We still need to have the capacity to be able to do what is best for ourselves. And we still need to have people around us who can, support us, and that we, and that we don't feel that this is, that people are looking at us and thinking that, oh, well, you brought this on yourself. It's your own fault.
It's a newer conversation, I feel like. It is new in the community, isn't it?
Look, it is. And I know, I think actually when we're talking about language, I sort of feel like we need to, we've been talking about diabetes and language matters for some time. I almost feel that maybe this is the next frontier of the language movement, is really, getting to that point where we're explaining the words that support people rather than the words that really harm people. Before I let you go, I follow you on social media, and I look forward to whatever you're baking on Sundays. Oh. When did that start? You are amazing. You bake something different and fun almost every week, it seems. Yeah. So I'm from an Italian family. Food is always something that is central to it always has been central to my life. My mother is an amazing cook, and both my grandmothers were as well, and my sister is, and my husband's mother is an amazing cook as well. And it kind of was never going to be something that I didn't love and something that I did a lot. But I stress bake. So when I'm feeling a bit stressed and anxious and I've had a bit of a stressful day at work, or I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, I get in the kitchen and I bake cookies or bake a cake or bake slices. My neighbours love me. So people do keep saying, what do you do with all this food? Because there are days that I get home every day and I bake something, and I drop it into the neighbours and I take it to friends, and sometimes I take things into work even. And so it's an absolute passion. I think that I have a very, very, very big girl crush on Nigella Lawson, and I met her at the beginning of this year, and I have to stop saying that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I keep saying that in front of, my husband and my daughter. I was like, the best thing that's ever happened to me is I met Nigella Lawson, and they're just sitting there going, thanks, that's great. That's fantastic. She's an angel.
I love it. Do you make up those recipes? Do you follow recipes? Any favorites?
It's a bit of both. So I have lots of favorites, but I have some favorites that I always make. But because I cook and bake so much, I'm quite good at changing things around a little, adding things that I like. I do, I've always done this. I cut sugar content right back when I'm baking, because I always think that things are too sweet. And I don't know if that's because, I've just sort of over the last 20 years trained myself not to think that way. I don't know, but nobody's ever said this isn't sweet enough. I just always halve the sugar content when I'm making stuff, and everything still seems to come out okay. But I do have some, there are some old favorites, but I bake cookies every week for my daughter to take a couple in her lunch. She takes 3 each day, small cookies, and shares them with a couple of her friends, and she gets to choose what I make each week. Sometimes she bakes with me, but that Sunday afternoon ritual of baking cookies is it's a very soothing way to get ready for the week ahead.
Great. Renza, thank you so much for spending so much time with me and talking about all of these issues. And now we all want cookies, but thanks for being with me.
I can send you recipes. Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'll link up information to Renza's blog and more information on Diabetes Australia in the show notes at diabetes-connections.com. I think I'll put up the Grumpy Pumper information, or Grumps as she calls him, because he's been doing some great stuff as well. So I'll put all that information up in the show notes. And I know I say it every week, but I still get questions. Where are the show notes? Truly the easiest place, diabetes-connections.com. Click on the episode and it will appear with links, and, everything we talk about is there. Every podcast app has its own little quirks. I think, Apple Podcast app has a great way to go through details, but it's difficult to get the links. If you're listening on Facebook, I really just can't put the show notes in that form. And if you'd like to learn more, just make sure to go to the website. In our community connection this week, the Renegade Run. Now, this was a recent event in the Northeast in Massachusetts, and we first heard from these guys a couple of years ago. I spoke to them for the show. They have expanded. They're really having a nice impact, and they're learning more ways to make this event even more than just a terrific obstacle course fundraiser kind of thing. I was able to catch up with Tyson. He lives with type 1, and his daughter was diagnosed not too long ago. So what is the Renegade Run for people who don't know? This is an obstacle course?
Yeah, it's not your typical obstacle course race. People, I think, identify with obstacle course races and they think about like Spartan and Tough Mudders and Rugged Maniacs and mud runs or whatnot. This is more of like a run with obstacles, we like to call it, because it's different than what's out there. If it's for an avid runner who's trying to maybe change things up a little bit, we have pavement, we have wooded terrain, and we have obstacles that are in the way. Much like the life of a type 1 diabetic, there's an obstacle at every corner. Yeah, there's no mud, there's no water obstacles unless Mother Nature comes to play, and there's no fire, there's no electricity, none of that stuff. So it's I know some people can be intimidated by the word obstacle course.
How did this all start? What was the impetus to kick this off 7 years ago?
Well, my co-founder, Paul Foti, used to be one of my clients. I'm a personal trainer. So I started training him, and then I got him into my group of running friends. And we were doing obstacle races at the time, your typical Tough Mudders and whatnot. And we just, so we were doing all that, and we got invited to a diabetes fundraiser and realized that we wanted to focus on something that was raising money for simply just a cure. There's a lot of fundraisers out there for this, and that, and the other thing in relation to diabetes, but we find that those fundraisers cover a lot. Cost of employees and marketing, and also, measures to make it easier to deal with type 1 diabetes, education, all that stuff, which is great. But we wanted to focus specifically on something that was out to cure type 1 diabetes. So we decided we would try our own fundraiser and donate directly to that cause, because we had done obstacle races. We said, let's try to do an obstacle race and see how it takes off. And we were successful in the first year, back in 2011, a small race, and a few hundred people, and a few obstacles, and it worked out well. We were able to pull it off, and we've kind of grown every year, make it a little more challenging. The whole event is more family friendly now. We get a lot more people, and it's really a big festival. We have it's a whole family day, really. To be honest with you. Do
you find that a lot of people come out who don't have a connection to type 1? Or is it mostly families and sponsors?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this year, part of our registration process, we asked people what their tie-in with type 1 diabetes was. We asked them, are you type 1 diabetic? Are you a family member of a type 1 diabetic? Or are you a friend of someone with type 1 diabetes? And we've actually, most people, I have to say, are responding to that question, and they're running for a cause. So I hate to say, but in the years past, we really didn't have an idea if everyone was running for a cause, or they're just running because it's a challenging event. But it seems like, and we're keeping an eye on it, that people are running for the cause. And yeah, there's people out there that are running just to be part of the event and whatnot. But it's really great to see so many people that are there to support either a friend, a family member, or a type 1 diabetic themselves.
So you've been doing this 7 years. You were a personal trainer before this, living with type 1. Has this changed your outlook on type 1 at all, having seen all these people now who are coming through the cause?
Well, definitely having type 1, I have always been kind of an advocate for it, but my stage is a little bit bigger now, and I'm speaking more about it than before. In donating to the cure, I'm learning more about the cure. So I know that there's a cure out there, and Dr. Faustman is so close. So I am more attuned to the awareness that's needed for type 1 diabetics, as well as what's out there for possible cures.
I guess what I'm asking, too, though, is by training people with type 1, does it change or does it educate you more about what's going on with you?
It keeps me more in tune with it. I still am training, and I do have some type 1 diabetics that I surround myself with. I do train a lot of type 2 diabetics, so I'm even trying to inform them of the difference. It's amazing that you have there's such an imbalance of people that have type 2 diabetes. They still, have questions about what type 1's about. But specifically to your question, talking and working with type 1 diabetics, it keeps me on the front lines of how crazy it can be. Like I had a client a couple of years ago who was a type 1 diabetic, and he was talking about how his sugars were all over the place. And so I was talking about what his week was like at work, and he said, "Oh, it's stressful, it's awful." I said, "Well, there you go." He's like, "Oh my God!" I said, "I didn't even catch on that." He goes, "Matt, work has been very stressful." I said, "Yeah, so your numbers are all over the place." So it keeps me, and now him, just talking about it keeps us like, okay, yep, this could be this, could be that, and it helps because if you don't, I don't know if you remember, but my 6-year-old daughter was diagnosed in October of last year.
Yes.
And, school just started a few weeks ago, and the numbers, the second and third day of school, her numbers were all over the place. And because of just me being an advocate for it and talking about type 1 diabetes all the time, I'm like, hey, that's because she's in school. Her sugars are high as it can be. So I think being on top of it, 24/7 myself, but also talking about it helps you remember those things that could be affecting the numbers,
What grade is she in this year?
She's in first grade now.
Wow. How's she doing?
She does pretty well with it, to be honest with you. She struggles with the infusion site changes and the sensor site changes.
Yep.
But she wears the pump and she has her iPod. She doesn't, we're doing most of the care for her. She'll check herself, which is great. This past weekend, she did step 1 of the sensor insertion, which was putting sticking the whole device on her and patting it down. I pulled the trigger, of course, but so she's got a good hang of it. I do see once in a while, which I don't like to see, is she can be very shy about taking her pump out in public, or she wears it in a spy belt. And I went to a friend of mine's house a few weeks ago, and we were getting ready to eat dinner, and I said, all right, Elise, take your pump out. We got to give you some insulin. And she was very shy, and she got up, up against my hip. And I can understand it because she's 6 years old, but it's also something that, because I've lived with it and because I'm an advocate for it, I don't want to see that. I want her to step out of her shell because, kids don't want to be singled out as being different. So I'm just trying to get her to be a little more comfortable with having it.
I will tell you that we struggled with the infusion sets, the insertion, for a very long time. I mean, Benny was diagnosed at 2 on a pump at 2.5, and he hated those. The set changes were so difficult, and it's amazing to see around age 7 or 8, he could do it himself occasionally. He started doing it himself. And now I don't remember the last time I've changed anything. It is crazy. Really? He does it all himself, and he doesn't even remember that he used to be afraid of them, which to me is remarkable. Correct. I was always worried he'd have these nightmares, he was scarred for life. He's like, I was fine, Mom. I never cared. I was like, you used to run and hide. So it's tough. I mean, hang in there.
It's and I can understand being anxious for it. I mean, I still do it once in a while. You don't know if you're going to pull that trigger and it's going to hurt like all can be,
Oh, yeah.
So it's true, but it's frustrating too because it literally took me, I think I changed her sensor site on Friday night, and it takes me about 3 minutes. I was dealing with her for like 20-25 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
To get her between trying to take the old one off and put the new one on. I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, this is taking forever. Like, come on now. So it's frustrating. It's difficult, but I can understand where she's coming from.
I do too. Gosh, I remember those days. So back to the Renegade Run. What is your favorite part of that day? I mean, when it rolls around, you guys have to be exhausted and, over all the organization is paying off. But is there a part of the race or the day that really stands out to you?
It's funny you should say that. So I was thinking about it today. I was talking to a client of mine about how doing this, doing the race every year, it's kind of like when you're getting ready to get married, like you're putting on the wedding. It's like months and months of work and frustration and stress. And the day comes and everything goes smoothly and everyone has a good time and you blink your eyes and it's over.
Right.
So that being said, the smiles on people's faces, the reactions we get from people that say, oh my gosh, the stuff you guys are doing is great, the awareness, donating to Dr. Faustman, and the whole day is like the reaction afterwards even the day after or that afternoon. Everyone just has such a great time. And more than anything, that's my favorite part. Seeing people, all these people come through. Like I ride my bike around the entire park for, upwards of 3 or 4 hours just watching people run through and seeing people try their hardest at any obstacle. You see people that are doing this where they would never do it again or they've never done it before. They just want to run. So just seeing the people, the smiles on their faces, the kids that are out there, that really makes it worth my while. That's really the best part of the day.
That's fantastic. Well, I hope it's a great event. It's always so nice to have those crisp fall days.
Yeah. So I wanted to point one thing out that's different.
Yep.
Because, I met you again at the conference, the Diabetes for Life conference, and that was very empowering for me. And I left that with an understanding of what it's actually like, or I should say a better understanding of what it's like to be around other families that get it and around other type 1 diabetics. It's because of that conference that we're doing the type 1 diabetes, like the ask on the registration, as far as if you are diabetic and if you're related to, because we're gonna have a type 1 cares tent. We've started this campaign called Type 1 Cares, and we actually sent a little boy to the Jocelyn Diabetes Camp, and this past summer we also sent a girl to the Clara Barton. So it's a new campaign that we have to help out type 1 families. But because of that, we're actually going to have a tent there for type 1 families, type 1 diabetics and type 1 families. Just, again, we kind of want to hit on the community aspect of getting those type 1 diabetics to come over and be around other type 1 diabetics, other families that get it. Just to chat. It's not like we're selling anything over there. It's like, here, this, I'm a type 1 diabetic too, and I hope, it's a new thing this year, but hoping that we can get some folks to, form some kind of bond or relationship with a local type 1 diabetic or a local mom that has a kid that's type 1 diabetic. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's wonderful. That's fantastic that you're doing that. I love it. I know exactly what you mean. Those connections are amazing.
Yeah, it made a big difference for me at that conference. And it just, that's why I decided I think it would be a good idea to do that.
That's terrific. I'm glad you brought that up, because any kind of in-person connection, I think, is absolutely amazing and crucial, as you said, just at Friends for Life, to meet other people and to have them understand that it might take you 2 minutes to change your set, could take an hour to change your 6-year-olds. Right. Other people are like, what's that about? But we get it. So I think it's fabulous that you're doing that. Good stuff. Thank you so much again.
Oh, my pleasure. Hopefully that's a hit. We'll have to keep you informed of how much of a difference that made, because I'm really hoping it does.
More information about the Renegade Run, just go to the show notes, diabetes-connections.com. I love that they're doing more in terms of connecting people locally and then doing events during the year. Already a great event. They're raising money, but that's just good stuff. Our Know Better segment this week, keeping insulin at the right temperature from manufacturer to pharmacy to fridge. Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. I talk about them every week. They are grain-free, gluten-free. And I talk about the waffles and the cookies. Did you know that they make cake mix? I hesitated because I was going to just say they make cake mix, but it's muffin mix. It's batter. You can use it in so many different ways. They call it all-purpose mix. And it has protein, as always, grain-free and gluten-free. And you can use this in so many different ways as you bake. Know Foods are better versions of your favorite treats, as they say, made with clean ingredients, and they are really great if you're on different eating plans, low carb, paleo, keto, if you're like me and you want to just have those yummy, baked, chewy, bready kind of foods. Know Better. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Know Foods logo. Late last year, there was a small study that got a lot of attention about the wide variation in they call it the level of activity in insulin that we buy at the pharmacy. Basically, does it stay cold? Is it okay? What happens to it? So, as I said, this was a small study. Now, JDRF, the American Diabetes Association, the Helmsley Charitable Trust, all these groups got together, and they're trying to do a much bigger study to evaluate the consistency and potency of insulin purchased at retail pharmacies across the United States. We talked about the initial study when it came out. And when we say it was a small study, it looked at 18 vials of NPH and regular insulin. It was randomly purchased in U.S. pharmacies, and it found that none of those samples met the standards from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, from the FDA. Now, again, this was NPH and regular. It was not the more commonly now used Humalog and Novolog that more people use. But it really prompted the questions to be asked, what's going on here? So now JDRF, ADA, the Helmsley Trust that I mentioned have funded to the University of Florida a 1-year study to look more deeply into this. Because, it's not enough that we're paying so much for it. Now we got to make sure that it's working. So within this release, within this news release, within the information here, there's certainly no danger. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with the insulin that's going out. And again, Humalog, Novolog, they were not looked at in this very small initial study. The question was really more about the quality and the strength. So at worst, as I'm reading this, it would just be a weaker insulin, but we all know how dangerous that could be. But there's nothing wrong with the insulin itself. I just want to be clear on that. I don't want to worry anybody. And everybody involved in this study says go ahead and continue taking insulin as you are taking it, and talk to your endo and your doctors if you are concerned. And now you know better. A lot going on in the show this week, and you know what? The hits just keep on coming. We are talking to Bigfoot next week, catching up to see what they are up to these days. Oh, and did you see, I put it out on Twitter, but I don't know if you saw it anywhere else on social media. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, do I have to say that, has a new show coming out in January called The Titan Games on NBC. And they released a promo and some eagle eyes. I have to admit I was tipped off, but I did see it. I spotted it. Found Chris Ruden in the video. Do you remember Chris? We talked to him last year. Chris is a bodybuilder in our community. He has type 1 diabetes. He also was born without a left hand. He wears a prosthetic, and he is an interesting guy to begin with. He is so much fun to talk to. He is dynamic and energetic, and I was not at all surprised that he was selected for this show. But man, it looks amazing and bananas that what these people are going to be doing. So we're talking to Chris in just a couple of weeks, and we will be releasing that episode when the show comes out. I am thrilled for him, and it's always great to see Type 1 represented on the national stage, especially somebody who's so nice and really gives back to the community like Chris does. So that's very cool stuff. All right, as I leave you, we are on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, I'm just Stacey Sims. One account there because that's enough for now. But Diabetes Connections and Stacey Sims pretty much everywhere else. And you can always find me at the regular old email, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com. It's STACEY. Thank you to John Buchanan, my editor from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.